we're talking about power, Joe, you kind of mentioned there's been a shift. We've often talked about rural versus urban on this show. Now that the leadership is changing, how does that, what impact will that have on the St. Louis area? Let's be selfish here for a minute.
We are very selfish, according to the Kansas City Star, by the way. I'm not going to say that it's not going to make any impact, because I think when you have somebody who is from your area, you know, there might be an advantage there. But I think that this whole idea about, you know, St. Louis losing influence because you're going from Deal to Richardson might be a tad, you know, overstating things. Todd Richardson handled the bill that actually enabled the arch tax in St. Louis, and whether, you know, it was by design or whether somebody told him to do it is kind of irrelevant. It kind of shows that, you know, he was willing to carry something for the St. Louis area. And for good or bad, depending on what you think of Paul McKee, the person behind the land assemblage tax credit, or at least the person that sponsored it in 2007, was Ron Richard from Joplin. So that shows that if people who want to move up and get in leadership, because he was Speaker of the House after that, they have to pay attention to the urban areas, because it's kind of a necessity to not only, you know, pass a broad agenda, but also to just mollify people within their own caucus.
Although I think Jason and I have had an intellectual disagreement on this, because I think it could have a bigger impact than some believe. And I think an example of this is the fact that State Senator Mike Parsons, who's from Southwest Missouri, who now is running for governor, has been very specific. I interviewed him. He believes that he can win as the next governor without the urban areas. He looks at how the right to farm constitutional amendment passed despite opposition in the urban areas, and he sees that as a template for how a rural candidate could win statewide without the urban areas. And that does have, I mean, whether he's right or wrong, that does have an impact as far as the urban areas, seeing that, where someone is saying, I think I can win statewide and I don't need you. And I think that will affect decision-making in Jeff City if people like that are successful.
We have a clip of some of you who were here previously talking about what might happen in the time since you were here and now. So I want to roll this clip. I'll meet somewhere in between, meet the press and Jon Stewart with a fraction of the budget of both, and just get your reaction to what you said then. So let's take a look at you guys then.
Most of those proposals will go nowhere. I'm not saying whether I like them or not. Yes.
Proposals.
I'm not saying whether I like them or not. I'm just saying the reality of the political environment in Jefferson City is such. The bottom line is you've got a lot of legislators who privately say nothing's going to happen, or if something does happen, it'll be minor.
I think education is probably the best example we have in the last couple of years of how we try to work together.
Is that your top priority going in, education?
It's one of our priorities. I would say that we also have to look at policy that will positively impact Ferguson. But I do have to say in that, education is the foundation of everything.
Okay, so just so you know what we're doing, we like to have the post show where things are a little looser on the show, and just a little technical housekeeping there. Apologize. Thanks, Eddie. We appreciate that. So something that we were talking about there, and we've touched on it some. You said you were surprised there wasn't more of a Ferguson focus when you got to Jefferson City this session. Were you surprised at all? Was there, Andy? I'm curious, get your thoughts, kind of looking at this from the other side of the river at SIUE. Were any surprises from what was expected to what actually happened?
Well, Speaker Deal specifically said this will not be a Ferguson agenda this year. I live in his district, by the way.
You have the perspective of both sides of the river.
Both sides of the river.
So you have
there.
no representation now.
That's true. You have no
That's
representation.
True.
I adapt people,
voice.
so you can.
But I think that some of the predictions, and particularly about education, there was some education bills that made it through. There was some education funding that was increased. Maybe not by what it needed to be, but something got through. So in that sense, I think that it did turn out like it was supposed to. But I'd like to go back to this urban-rural split, because if you look at the bills that didn't pass, they were by and large the urban issues that did not make it through. And I think that's very telling. And the fact that you know, the one leader from the metropolitan area who we had is now out of power.
So things are maybe changing. You're shocked that they would even bring up right to work, but again, there's a large majority of Republicans, and if they want it, maybe things are just changing. If they are shifting, maybe.
Well, typically you know what is going to come up, and in November and December we didn't know. We had an interest. Obviously, I wanted to see Ferguson legislation pass, but we didn't know what was going to come up. Typically, there is a deal that's made either between two caucuses or just within one caucus, and there was never any clarity in that. And I think in the Senate, at least, I cannot speak for the House, but House Bill 42, the transfer bill, was very, very important, and it was one of the pieces of legislation that we put as a priority in the Senate, and we were able to send that out and work with the House. But when it comes to other pieces of legislation, I just don't know what the focus was supposed to be. We missed out on a grand opportunity to put our state in a different direction, on the right path, especially when it comes to the treatment of individuals who have been harassed for so many years, decades, and generations.
Well, I think the geographical shift is there's another third geography in there, and that's urban, rural, and suburban. And we have to remember that suburban issues are much different from those in high urban areas and then in rural. And even on the issue of education, urban and rural legislators tend to agree in the House at least, and they have pretty much stood tall on supporting public education and going against some of the bills, including quite a few people that voted against House Bill 42 this year, Senate Bill 493 last year. But the suburban legislators tend to rule the day. What the suburban legislators want tend to be what gets to the Senate. That tends to be the shift we're seeing now. That rural legislators they're representing a lot of poor folks. They don't matter as much. Urban legislators represent a lot of poor folks. They don't matter as much. Suburban legislators tend to represent the money in these areas, and they get a lot of pull.
You see that from the outside looking in?
I think to some degree. Now, you look at St. Louis County, though, and St. Louis County is kind of an urban-suburban mix, even though it's a county. So I think that's one of the reasons there had been hope among some that some of the Ferguson issues would have been brought up. Now, in the clip you played, I did predict a lot wouldn't happen. But the big bill, which was the court reform bill, as Jason has written extensively about, did pass. And I think that could have some impact down the road, assuming that there isn't a court fight, because to me, I just think there could be constitutional problems because they're imposing stricter limits on communities in St. Louis County than in rural Missouri.
Okay, we'll leave.